Hey guys, it's College Studios here. In today's video, I'm going to be giving my full in-depth review of Dorney Park's new for 2024 roller coaster, Iron Menace. This ride is huge for Dorney Park. This is the first brand new roller coaster the park has gotten in 19 years, ever since Hydra the Revenge, and it is definitely a major addition. They went all out. They rethemed the entire back area of the park to the steel yard. They've incorporated this really elaborate backstory into the ride and its surrounding area. There's also the haunt attraction attached to the area that opened last year, and it all blends together to create this really excellent cohesive experience, not to mention the fact that there's a new restaurant, new gift shop. There's so much that has come with the addition of Iron Menace, but in this video I'm going to be taking a closer look at the ride itself, because I'm sure a lot of you are wondering how exactly Iron Menace is, how good it is, how it rides, where it ranks in the park. I'm going to be covering all that in this video. So first, let's start off with when you're going into the station. Of course, the theming, like I said, is done spectacularly. The sign says McTavish Steel because it is a steel mill themed after Hiram McTavish. That is kind of where the whole backstory of the ride comes in. See a lot of different equipment in the queue, and there is an extended queue that goes all the way down the ride's furthest point, and there's some more theming in that extended queue as well. But you will climb up the staircase and pretty much be right in the station where you'll meet the grouper. Grouper will send you to one of 3 rows. There are 3 rows on this attraction, and each row provides, in my opinion, a completely different experience, and I'll get to that a little later on. You'll board your train, and what you'll notice is that there's actually an odd number of seats in each row. There is only 7 seats in each row, just like Dr. Diabolical's Cliffhanger at Six Flags Fiesta Texas. As far as I know, those 2 coasters are the only 2 B&M coasters to have an odd number of seats in a row. So what that means is that when you sit in the dead middle, you are really in the dead middle, and I highly recommend giving that a shot at least once, because it's a really unique experience, especially in the front row when you're just dead in the middle. The track is right there, perfectly aligned with you. Gives a really cool visual effect and definitely changes the way the ride is. From there, you'll have the whole dispatch spiel. There's a lot of lights and noises, and the gates open and you go right up that lift hill, and it's a pretty quick lift hill, a very steep lift hill as well. You definitely feel just how steep and how quick you get up that 160-foot tall lift hill. And once you crest the top, you get an absolutely spectacular view of Dorney Park. You look to your right, you have Possessed Spike right there. Look to your left, you have Steel Force, and straight ahead you have the entirety of Dorney Park and the surrounding area. Despite the fact that this ride is located kind of down at the bottom of the hill, you still get a phenomenal view at the top. And honestly, I like that this, unlike most of the other dive coasters, doesn't have that turn before you drop. You pretty much go right into it, so it gives you this really grand feel as you're coming up to the drop. And as you're going up the lift hill, the speakers are playing these sounds that relate again to the theming, and when you crest and get ready to drop down that 95-degree drop, there's a whole audio spiel that goes along with it and really does add to the ride. I know Dr. Diabolical also features this, and I think it's a really great touch to this already amazing type of attraction where you have that hang at the drop, and it really builds the anticipation as you get ready to drop down. But let's talk about that drop, because it is spectacular. You really feel that extra 5 degrees where it's not just vertical but beyond vertical. And of course, the best seat to be in for this drop is going to be the back row. You do get that extra bit of whip. And in the front, you definitely get a bit of a different sensation where you're kind of hanging over, so you still get airtime, but not quite as pronounced as you do in the back. From there, you're going to hit your top speed of 64 miles per hour and fly past that kind of base molten area thing. I don't really know what to describe it as, but the base of the footer has this like molten pattern, and there's bricks all knocked around. You can see it too in the animation. They were really pushing it, but it creates a really cool visual effect, and I'm curious if this is going to have lights on it at night. It's also where your photo op is, but right away you're going to go into your first inversion, which is an Immelman. What I like about this Immelman specifically is that it feels a little different than a lot of the other B&M dive coaster Immelmans. It has a bit of a different profile to it that kind of exaggerates the forces of the element a little bit, so you really feel that extra floatiness and that sensation of weightlessness that really does add to this element. And in that valley between the first drop and the Immelman, every single ride I took on this, and I got 8 rides on Iron Menace, so I think I have a pretty fair judgment of this attraction. I grade out really hard. It is a very intense pullout. You will definitely feel the positive G's And the same can be said for the next valley in between the Immelman and the next element, which is the 0G roll. And what I like about the 0G roll is its profiling allows for a different sensation depending on what side of the train you're on. If you're on the right side of the train, you'll get some more weightlessness going into it, and if you're on the left side, you get some more weightlessness coming out of it. It really does create for a really dynamic sensation depending on where you are in the train. And then of course you go into the most unique element on this attraction, which is the inclined or tilted loop. This is the only element of its type on a dive coaster, and it is super intense. You flip through it ridiculously fast. It is a really intense moment. This is also going to be where you're going to feel some gray out moments as you go toward the final inversion of the ride, which is a corkscrew. Not necessarily the best element of the ride, but it's got a nice floaty feel to it. And of course, that leads into the turn into the brake run. Now, I did not touch on the ride's smoothness because I do want to kind of dedicate its own segment to that. And this ride, for whatever reason, isn't actually that smooth considering it's a brand new ride, but before you all freak out saying that it's a rough ride, I think this actually works to Iron Menace's advantage. I've ridden other B&M dive coasters, and the one that is most comparable to this one that I've ridden is Emperor at SeaWorld San Diego. And honestly, I wasn't a huge fan of Emperor because I feel like it lacked a bit of bite. It wasn't super intense, and it kind of just glided through its elements, and it was, of course, super smooth. Iron Menace, though, has a bit of a bite to it. It's definitely got a bit of a shake, but again, not something that's going to give you a headache. It's more so something that adds character to the ride, and I know everyone has been talking about that jolt on the final turn of the ride, and honestly, I hope that stays. I'm not sure how good it is for the trains and the track, but I think it really adds character to the element, where otherwise you would just very smoothly glide into the brakes. This kind of adds a bit of excitement to that element, and that's not the only spot where you're going to feel sensations like this. And another note, if you're looking to get a smoother ride experience, ride in the front row in the dead middle. That is probably the smoothest ride you will get on this attraction. That was actually my first front row ride. It was in that dead middle seat, and it was super smooth compared to some of my other rides. If you ride on the edge of the train, you will definitely feel the shakiness everyone is talking about. And again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It just kind of adds some uniqueness to the ride. You'll definitely feel a little bit of shaking at that first valley between the drop and the Immelman, and at the top of the 0G roll, as well as the corkscrew, and a little bit on the inclined loop, you'll feel a bit of a kink, not as pronounced as the one on that final turn, but you will feel it at the peak of all those inversions. And like I said, I don't really think that's a bad thing. I think it kind of adds to the character of this ride. It feels a little more out of control than I think it would otherwise if it was super smooth. And there's a lot of other parts of the ride where you'll also feel some shakiness, and it kind of makes the ride feel a little more chaotic, which I personally appreciate because I've always felt a lot of the newer B&M coasters don't really feel that intense compared to the older ones. This one does. You definitely feel the positive G-forces and the floatiness. Coming out of that inclined loop, you're definitely shaking around a little bit as you go into that final element, which I think makes that final inversion better. And in addition to all that, I do want to talk about seat preferences because, like I said, where you sit on this ride makes a huge difference on the ride experience you will have. Not necessarily for the better or for worse, but will just change the sensations you feel. Personally, out of the edge seats, I do prefer the left edge seat. I found that you get slightly more weightlessness and other forces of that nature when you're riding in the left edge, particularly on the 0G roll. The way it's pitched, you're going to get more weightlessness on the left side, especially as you exit the element, than you would on the right side. But even then, on the Immelman, you'll get some really good weightlessness no matter what edge you're on. Just note that the closer to the middle of the train that you sit, meaning center, not row 1, row 2, row 3, you will feel a little less of those weightless sensations I'm talking about where you feel kind of lateral stuff. You're not really going to feel that towards the middle of the train, but if you are on the edges, you're definitely going to feel that a lot more. And as for rows, I definitely think row 3 and row 1 are the two best. Row 2 kind of mixes the two together a little bit, and that's not to say it's bad, but I definitely think personally I like the back row the best. Back row is definitely the roughest row. Even if you're in the middle of the train, you will still feel more shakiness than you would in the front row, but I feel that the extra force you get in the back row makes it that much better than the front. The front, it feels like you have some time to kind of process what's going on because it's a little more of a gradual sensation going through the elements. You're not ripping through them. In the back row, the pacing is so good. You're just flying from one element to another. And that kind of brings me to another thing too, which is the length of the ride. I know a lot of people are saying that the ride is too short, it looks like it's underwhelming. And it's definitely true that Iron Menace is not a very long ride at all. I think from drop to brakes, it's a little under 30 seconds of prime ride time, which is definitely very short for a coaster of this magnitude. But honestly, during my rides, I felt pretty fulfilled by the end of the ride. I didn't feel like I wanted the ride to keep going longer. I feel like each element really stood on its own and made the ride feel like a complete package between the theming, the entrance, and of course the ride itself, which I definitely thought was a little surprising. I think overall the ride surprised me in a positive manner. If you know me, I'm not like a huge fan of the B&M dive coasters, specifically the ones with vest restraints. I do like that Iron Menace's vest restraints were a little less restrictive than some of the other B&M coasters that have these vest restraints. I still think the airtime would be better if it had the traditional over-the-shoulder restraints, but that would probably make the rest of the ride a little bit worse and more uncomfortable, since Iron Menace, like I said, isn't the smoothest ride. It definitely has a bit of a bite to it. So the vests don't come down terribly tight on you. As long as you have a little bit of wiggle room from the start, you should be fine by the end of the ride. But I definitely think Iron Menace far exceeded my expectations. Like I said, dive coasters aren't really my forte, and I thought Emperor was a little underwhelming when I rode it, but I think Iron Menace easily beats Emperor. I'm not sure if it's on the same level as Griffin or SheiKra, which are the two older B&M dive coasters, the 200 footers. Those ones have a heavy focus on airtime and grandness. This one has the airtime on the drop, but focuses on very different sensations throughout the rest of the ride, and that's what I like most about this coaster. It is very different than any other coaster out there, especially other dive coasters. It doesn't feel like the other ones out there, and it gives it kind of this unique identity, which I think is really cool. And of course, looking at it in the scope of Dorney Park, personally, I think it's definitely a top 3 coaster in the park. So I would probably have my top 3 in no particular order being Steel Force, Talon, and Iron Menace. If Iron Menace can creep its way up past Talon or Steel Force, I'm not sure about that, but it is definitely a fantastic addition to Dorney Park's lineup. It's so great to see that Dorney is finally getting a new coaster like this, and they went all out with this addition, and I really hope this winds up meaning more additions coming to Dorney Park in the future. If you're watching this video and you're not sure if you want to go to Dorney Park this year, go for it. This is probably one of the best years you can go to Dorney Park. You've got the brand new Iron Menace, Thunderhawk turning 100 years old this year. They've done a lot around the park to make it the best it's ever been. So with all of that being said, Iron Menace, fantastic ride. If I had to rate it out of 10, I would probably give it a 9 out of 10. Not a 10 out of 10 because it's not like my favorite coaster ever, but considering the fact that it's a dive coaster and how short it is, I think that overall it far exceeded my expectations and is an incredible ride for Dorney Park. If you guys enjoyed this in-depth review of Iron Menace, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos coming soon to Hollywood Studios. Goodbye, guys.